Hey there, welcome, and thank you for being here tonight. Before we begin, I'd love to ask you something, if you feel comfortable. Let me know in the comments where in the world you're listening from, and what time it is there as you're drifting off to sleep. It's a quiet joy to know that these stories are gently reaching people across different corners of the world. And it reminds me how connected we all are, even in silence now. Some chapters of history are quiet, not because they were peaceful, but because the people who lived them had no choice but to stay silent. Tonight, we're traveling back to Imperial China, not to sit beside the emperor or walk among the noble families, but to follow someone who served them in silence, in duty, and often in sorrow. The eunuch's men, reshaped by circumstance, entrusted with the deepest secrets of the court, yet stripped of something deeply personal, long before they ever set foot in the palace. Their lives were complex. Some gained great influence. Others lived and died in the background, forgotten, voiceless, invisible. This isn't a tale told with judgment. It's told with softness. A slow unraveling of history, meant to calm your mind as you drift into sleep. If this quiet space helps, you relax. If you find a moment of peace here tonight, I'd be grateful if you gently tapped the like button, or subscribed to stay close to these long, sleepy journeys through time. So take a breath, let your body rest, and allow your thoughts to slow, because tonight you'll walk through the golden halls of the Forbidden City, wearing the silent, heavy truth of what it meant to be trusted, but never truly free. Let's begin. You are 7 years old, standing barefoot on cold stone, surrounded by silence thick enough to press against your ribs. Your mother clutches your shoulders tightly, her hands tremble. You don't understand why your father won't look you in the eye. His silence feels heavier than the wooden gates you're being led toward. This is the last morning. You'll remember as a child. The year is 1421, and you are in the outskirts of the Ming Empire's capital, Beijing. The new Forbidden City is rising like a golden mirage in the heart of the empire, and the court hungers for boys like you. Not just servants, not just loyal subjects, eunuchs. The word eunuch today might carry a whisper of cruelty, but in Ming China, it was institutionalized, a path to social elevation wrapped in mutilation. And it began with the knife. The process was simple and horrifying. A local agent, sometimes a relative, would identify boys, often from poor families, and offer money, rice, or social leverage in exchange. In desperate times, that was enough. Some parents even made the offer themselves, not out of malice, but hunger. Castration was the price of entry. Unlike other empires, where only the testicles were removed, Chinese eunuchs lost everything, both penis and testes sliced away in one procedure. This was done with minimal sanitation, no anesthesia, and performed not by a doctor, but often by another eunuch who had survived the same ordeal. The wound was packed with a reed tube to ensure urination would be possible once healing began. If the boy lived, and not all did, he would spend weeks battling fever, infection, and immobilizing pain. The child would then present the severed parts, preserved in brine, to the imperial authorities. This macabre proof was registered, often kept as part of the boy's file. It was called the Bojian, the precious package. If the boy ever tried to escape his new life, his parts could be inspected again, to verify that he was truly a eunuch, and not an impostor. The bureaucracy of suffering was surprisingly well organized. At first, the system might seem barbaric, but there was reasoning behind it. carefully thought out by rulers terrified of betrayal. A eunuch was, by design, unable to have a family. No wife, no children, no legacy. That made him, in theory, loyal only to the emperor. A man with no lineage had no dynasty of his own to protect. In an empire obsessed with hierarchy and bloodline, that mattered than perhaps just as importantly. Eunuchs were allowed into the most sacred and secretive parts of the palace, the inner court, where the emperor's wives, concubines, and children lived. No man of full anatomy could be permitted near these women. Even guards had to be eunuchs. This was not only about modesty, but about power. The offspring of the emperor were the heart of dynastic continuity. Their protection demanded extreme measures, so the emperor relied on them, fully, blindly. Eunuchs could rise to power, command armies, or direct imperial edicts, but only once they had first passed through what many called the Gate of No Return. After castration, boys were housed in the Department of Eunuch Affairs, which was run by senior eunuchs men who had already spent decades in service. The younger boys were trained not just in etiquette and cleaning, but in reading, writing, memorizing the emperor's rituals, and executing detailed tasks like tea preparation, robe arrangement, and fan handling. You weren't just a servant. You were expected to be invisible, obedient, and perfect in silence. You learned how to carry a message with your eyes only, how to bow at exactly the right depth, how to manage incense timing to match prayer ceremonies, and you learned, above all else, not to speak unless ordered to. Some boys cried in the dark, others simply stopped speaking altogether. Many, especially, in their first year, succumbed to infection or depression. But if you survived, if you passed your tests and were deemed pure enough, silent enough, useful enough, you might be sent to the Forbidden City to serve the Son of Heaven himself. But what about your family? You had become a source of honor or shame. For some, a son accepted into imperial service, even as a eunuch, brought status to the entire village. Families would hang red silk strips over their doorways, signaling a connection to the Forbidden City. Gifts, favors, and even food stores might follow. Your sacrifice became your family's survival. For others, the loss of a son's fertility, the inability to carry on the family name, was unbearable. These families vanished from records, erasing their connection to a son who no longer belonged to them. Once you passed through the palace gates, you were no longer a villager. You were property of the emperor. Eunuchs were issued new names. Old identities, peasant names, village titles were removed. You might now be known as Li Zhong, a generic label meaning loyal servant. In court records, your past didn't matter, only your obedience. Some eunuchs began to redefine themselves through this new role. They adopted soft, careful voices, wore long robes with trailing sleeves, walked slowly with short steps. Their identity, genderless, voiceless, powerful. Only in silence was sculpted by the environment. Over time, the physical effects of castration became visible. Rounded features, higher-pitched voices, and the absence of facial hair. Some eunuchs took pride in their appearance, their robes perfectly pleated, their fan held just so, because it was one of the few things they could control. A body that had been altered became a tool of ritual perfection. Inside the palace, eunuchs lived in dormitories, often cold, windowless rooms packed with rows of wooden pallets. Cleanliness was paramount, but comfort was not. Each dormitory was supervised by a head eunuch, and infractions, like speaking after curfew, fighting, or hoarding food, were met with swift punishment. There was no privacy. Even your dreams could betray you, and you learned to wake without sound. Despite their proximity to luxury, eunuchs themselves rarely enjoyed it. They served emperors who bathed in gold basins and slept on dragon-embroidered cushions, but they ate watery rice, wore thin cotton robes in winter, and worked from sunrise to nightfall. You could be surrounded by silk and still feel only cold. Stone, perhaps the most haunting part of a eunuch's induction, was the ritual of surrender. Before receiving final placement, each new eunuch had to kneel before an imperial seal and swear eternal loyalty. The vow was not only spiritual, it was legal. Breaking your loyalty, deserting the palace, or even speaking imperial secrets after retirement could lead to public execution. And yet, thousands made the choice. Why? Because within the walls of the Forbidden City, a eunuch could rise. Unlike the rigid class structures outside, palace life sometimes rewarded loyalty, intelligence, and silence more than birth. Some eunuchs became ministers. Some controlled the emperor's schedule. A few even held the imperial seal in their hands, able to issue decrees in the emperor's name. But first, you had to survive, and so you kneel, a child reshaped by pain, loyalty, and ritual. Behind you, your village is already fading. Ahead of you, the palace rises, red walls, golden roofs, and the invisible weight of the dragon throne. Your life is no longer yours, but will it be one of servitude or power? The stone floors of the Forbidden City were always cool beneath your feet, no matter the season, and you learned to walk with your heels barely touching the ground, gliding rather than stepping. So the sound of your movement never disrupted the heavy silence of imperial space that you had survived. But now, your real test had begun. The journey from a nameless palace eunuch to a trusted servant of the emperor was not marked by grand ceremonies or celebrations. It happened in small, silent steps. One tea tray, one scroll, one whispered command at a time. And for those who succeeded, a life of subtle power awaited. But it was not without cost. The Forbidden City was divided into two main realms, the outer court and the inner court, The hierarchy among eunuchs was vast and complex. At the bottom were menial labor eunuchs, who swept floors, carried chamber pots, and opened gates. Above them were attending eunuchs, who worked directly in the halls, delivering food, preparing clothing, and arranging ritual spaces. Then came the managing eunuchs, who supervised entire buildings, led training, and issued punishments. At the very top were director eunuchs, also called the 8 supervisors during the Ming dynasty, who oversaw the 6 ministries, handled intelligence, and sometimes met directly with the emperor. These elite eunuchs were among the most powerful men in China. But the way up was not marked by merit alone. It required observation, discretion, and careful alliance building. You learned how to read faces, how to know when to speak and when to vanish. You memorized the preferences of powerful ladies, the soft signals of high-ranking eunuchs, and the emperor's moods by the pace of his footsteps. Rising meant pleasing those who noticed everything but trusted no one. As you climbed the palace ladder, your access improved. You went from sharing a crowded dormitory with 50 others to a chamber with just 2. You were allowed meat in your meals, sometimes pork dumplings or duck soup, rare luxuries for your class. You received stipends, fine fabric for robes, and in time, the right to write with red ink, a symbol of proximity to power. But with promotion came exposure to risk. A single misstep, spilling ink on an imperial robe, mispronouncing a concubine's name, or overhearing something you weren't meant to, could undo years of careful advancement. Punishments were often private and brutal. A eunuch who offended the wrong person might vanish overnight. Later found beaten and left outside the city gates with his tongue removed. In the Forbidden City, failure was not always loud. Sometimes it was silent and permanent. Some eunuchs, if they served long enough and proved their usefulness, were granted access to the emperor's personal quarters. This was the highest privilege and the most dangerous position a eunuch could hold. You became part of his rhythm, waking him, dressing him, tasting his meals before he did. You knew how many spoonfuls of medicine he would take without protest. You learned which fingers he used to count, and how to spot the twitch in his eyebrow that meant a minister would soon be dismissed. And in those moments, you held power few others could imagine. A mere gesture from you, the nod of your head, the passing of a scroll, the delay of a message, could shift court politics. Ministers feared you. Concubines courted your favor. The emperor relied on you. But still, you had no name, no children, no love. Your bed was empty. Your voice was soft. You were visible only when you were useful. And yet, for many eunuchs, this was enough. Some eunuchs attempted to retire. It was allowed, in theory. After decades of service, a eunuch could be granted a small plot of land, a stipend, and permission to leave the palace. But most stayed. Why? Because the palace, for all its pain, was a place of structure and purpose. Outside, a eunuch was often shunned, seen as unnatural, even cursed. In cities and villages, they faced ridicule, suspicion, or pity. The social systems of China were built around family, lineage, and fertility. A eunuch, even a wealthy one, didn't fit. Inside, he could command princes. Outside, he was a ghost. And so most stayed. They chose cold stone over freedom, ritual over risk, obedience over loneliness. Even among eunuchs, relationships were complicated. You formed bonds, quiet, cautious friendships in the margins of palace life. You shared sweet rice balls in the shadow of incense burners. You whispered stories under moonlight in the servants' courtyards. Sometimes love even bloomed, platonic or romantic, but always quietly, always at risk. Yet just as often, rivalry poisoned trust. With only a few positions of real power available, jealousy was common. Gossip was a weapon. Backstabbing, literal and political, happened even among those who once shared meals to survive. You had to master the art of neutrality, to be loyal but not blind, social but not vulnerable. As you grew older, you changed, not just in body, but in mind. You were no longer the frightened boy from the village. You had become someone else, someone forged by silence, molded by ritual, and sharpened by watching others fall. You no longer flinched at orders. You no longer dreamed of home. But sometimes, late at night, in your dim stone chamber, you asked yourself, if everything that made me a man was taken, and everything that made me a person was reshaped by the palace, who am I now? Was it worth it, this slow climb through obedience and pain? Was this power truly yours? Or were you simply a finely trained instrument, waiting to be used and replaced? You are now 40 years old, and the Forbidden City no longer feels like a palace. It feels like a machine, one that never sleeps, never forgives, and never stops turning. You have lived longer inside these walls than outside them. You barely remember your mother's face. You haven't spoken your birth name in decades. The other eunuchs call you Supervisor Li now. Servants lower their heads when you walk past. Junior eunuchs stop breathing if you glance their way. In the inner court, you have become something solid, immovable, a fixture like the lacquered pillars or the silent stone lions outside the hall of supreme harmony. Your days begin before the sun rises. You wake in a chamber with thick curtains and clean robes folded precisely in the corner. You were served tea by a eunuch who, not long ago, stood where you once stood, young, quiet, trying not to tremble. You let the tea cool. You sip slowly. It is not for the warmth. It is a signal to the court. You are awake, and the gears of power can begin turning. Messages begin to flow. Your handwriting is crisp, your brushstrokes elegant. When you approve a request, it moves. When you delay one, nothing happens. Ministers who once ignored you now wait for your ink. There are moments when you glimpse the emperor, not during audiences, but in private, his back turned, his robe half-fastened, his voice rough from sleep. You help him dress. You adjust his dragon-embroidered belt. You hold a basin as he washes. He rarely speaks to you. When he does, it is usually a question, short and precise. Is it raining, or has the envoy arrived? You answer softly, always with your eyes lowered. Sometimes you wonder what he thinks of you. Does he see you as a man or a tool? Does he even remember the pain you endured to be allowed near him? But you never ask. You never will. Power, you've learned, doesn't always come with recognition. Sometimes it is a quiet permission. The way a door is opened before you knock. The way a noble bows, slightly unsure if you hold the emperor's ear. You've used this power carefully, never greedily. You've seen what happens to eunuchs who forget their place. You remember Lu Jin, who became so powerful he was called the second emperor. He wore robes finer than any minister. His servants walked backwards in his presence. But he flew too close to the sun. He was arrested, tortured, executed in public. His body was torn into pieces and left in the streets. You were there. You didn't flinch. You simply folded his name into memory. Another lesson. Your quarters are quiet at night, too quiet. You used to hate the silence. Now you need it. You sleep little. Your body aches. The old wound from your castration sometimes throbs in the winter. You keep a warm stone under your bedding, like the older eunuchs taught you. There is no one to care for you, not truly. No wife, no son. The young eunuchs offer gestures, but not love. They respect you, fear you even, but they do not know you. You are not meant to be known, not here, not in this life. Sometimes you walk the palace gardens at night, when the moonlight makes the stone paths look like silver rivers. You pass pavilions where concubines once laughed, where princes were born, where emperors wept. You've seen so much, more than any scholar, more than any general. But you will never be written about in the official histories. Eunuchs are shadows, useful, feared, forgotten. You wonder what will happen when you die. Will they remember your service? Will they speak your name in gratitude? Or will another boy take your place, wear your robes, hold your seal, and never ask where it came from? The answer does not matter. It never did. You gave your life to the empire, and in return, you were allowed to exist in its deepest chambers. That was the exchange. That was the contract. Still, there are nights when you dream not of home, but of what might have been. A life without pain, a body untouched. A path where you were allowed to grow into yourself, not carve yourself down to fit a role. You wake from these dreams cold, shaken, but the sun still rises. The emperor still needs tea. The palace still waits. You dress, you breathe, you continue. because that is what eunuchs do. You wake in darkness, long before the rooster crows. The world outside the forbidden city still sleeps, but within these walls, life is already moving. You rise quietly from your pallet, careful not to disturb the others in your dormitory. The silence here is sacred. The other eunuchs are waking too, each of you trained to begin the day without a word. You fold your blanket tightly, exactly 7 creases, just as the supervisors taught you. You wash with cold water from a shallow basin, your fingers numb but steady. You dress in layers of cotton robes, plain but spotless, and tie your belt with care. There is no room for sloppiness. One loose thread could be the end of your post. Your shift begins at the Hall of Supreme Harmony, one of the largest ceremonial buildings in the world. As you walk, you pass other eunuchs with the same blank expression, the same shuffled steps. You've all been shaped by the same mold, crafted for service. The outer courtyards are still dark, lit only by flickering lanterns. The smell of incense already clings to the air, mixed with cold, stone, and dew. Today, like every day, you have one purpose: to make the Emperor's world perfect before he opens his eyes. You begin with the floor. It must be swept 3 times, washed with warm water, and dried with soft cloths made from silk remnants. Dust is forbidden here. Even the shadows must fall neatly. Another eunuch prepares the Emperor's slippers, aligning them precisely at the foot of his raised platform. Another lights the first stick of incense, its smoke curling upward in silence. The Emperor's garments are laid out, each layer in order: inner robe, outer robe, sash, embroidered belt. You oversee this process with a calm gaze, not because you are relaxed, but because fear must never show. As sunrise nears, everything accelerates. The Emperor will rise with the dawn. You know this by the rhythms of his breathing through the curtain, and by the quiet signals of the older eunuchs who have served him for years. They don't speak either, but their movements change, slower, more deliberate. When he stirs, you and the others stand ready, heads lowered, hands folded. You do not look directly at him. You do not speak. If you are needed, a gesture will summon you. If not, you remain still, like furniture. The Emperor is younger than you. He is powerful, unpredictable, and raised in absolute authority. When he steps into his robe, you secure the fastenings with practiced speed. When he sits, you offer the tea, the first of many cups today. Your hands are steady. They must be. A spilled drop is not a small mistake. It is a mark against your record, a scar in the memory of the court. Once he is eaten, the palace truly awakens. Couriers arrive with sealed petitions. Ministers gather in the outer court. Eunuchs like you relay orders, carry scrolls, summon officials, dismiss guests. You move constantly, but carefully. Running is forbidden. Rushing is impolite. You glide from one task to the next, your mind sharp, your body invisible. There is no hour in the day that is truly yours. Even when you are not needed, you are expected to be ready. You do not eat when you are hungry. You eat when your schedule allows. A bowl of kanji in a stone hallway, a sip of hot water in the shadow of a pillar. You learn to live between moments. You memorize the needs of the Emperor's wives. You know which concubine requests chrysanthemum tea at dusk, and which prefers to be addressed only by title, never by name. In the mid-morning hours, you assist with the palace rituals. Offerings are placed before ancestral tablets. Prayers are chanted in hushed voices. You hold the incense just long enough to pass it gracefully to the priest. You help arrange the ceremonial objects in perfect symmetry. 1 inch off, and the emperor might notice. He always notices. By afternoon, you're carrying correspondence between halls. Some messages are nothing, a request for wine, a delayed appointment. Others are matters of life and death. You never know which is which, and so you treat each one with the same reverence. You do not read, you do not guess. You are the hand that delivers, not the eye that judges. That is what keeps you alive. Sometimes you pass a younger eunuch, one newly arrived from the outer provinces. His eyes still show fear. He glances around too much. He forgets to bow deeply enough. You correct him softly, not out of kindness, but survival. If he fails, the blame will reach you. In this place, no one rises alone, and no one falls alone either. As the sun begins to sink, you return to the hall of supreme harmony. The emperor prepares for evening rituals. Another round of clothing changes. Another bowl of soup, seasoned with medicinal herbs. Another cup of tea, steeped exactly 5 minutes. You carry the objects in sequence, hands balanced and eyes low. One of the emperor's sons runs by, laughing. You do not react. You've learned that laughter in this place is not always safe. When the emperor retires for the night, your day continues. You clean the hall again, fold garments, seal scrolls, log every item that has entered or left the room. You record your activities on a wooden slip. Your handwriting must be clean and exact. Sloppiness invites questioning, and questioning brings punishment. Only once the palace grows still do you return to your chamber. You remove your robe and sit on your thin blanket. Your legs ache. Your back burns. You close your eyes and try not to think. But you remember everything. The slipper that was slightly out of place. The eunuch who was missing from his post. The unusual expression on the emperor's face when he received a letter in red ink. You lie down, but you do not sleep easily. You are already preparing for tomorrow. The floor must be swept again. The robes must be perfect. The incense must be lit at the correct hour. And you must, once again, erase yourself and become nothing more than a silent presence in the halls of heaven's sun. You wake again before the city stirs, before even the birds begin to cry out across the roofs of Beijing. Your joints are slower this morning. The cold has crept deeper into your bones. You are older now, not old, but aged in a way the world outside the palace would not understand. In the Forbidden City, every year is heavier. Every mistake echoes longer. Every success fades faster. You sit upright on your thin bedding, wrap your robe tighter, and begin another day you already know too well. There is comfort in the routine, but also something hollow today. You are assigned to assist in the preparation of a ritual offering in the hall of Imperial ancestors. You know the hall well. It smells of centuries. Every surface is lac and reed. The candles burn low and thick, and the floorboards creak with ancient weight. You carry trays of fruit, fold the silk cloths that cover ancestral tablets, and wipe the dust that dares settle in the corners. You say nothing. You never say anything. The chief eunuch nods as he passes you, a slight motion of the chin. It means you're doing well enough to be left alone. As the ritual begins, you observe the imperial family from the edge of the room. The emperor stands tall, flanked by scholars and priests, all reciting verses in time with the beating of a slow, ceremonial drum. You are invisible, essential but invisible. You carry incense to the burner, offer water to the priest, and adjust the emperor's robe from behind so it drapes correctly. He never looks at you. That is how it should be. In this world, the closer you are to the center of power, the more you must disappear. After the ceremony, the mood shifts quickly. Ministers file into the hall of literary glory. Your presence is required. You carry scrolls between chambers. Each one a piece of the empire's nervous system, ixabadics about land disputes, temple repairs, tax updates. You do not read them, but you feel their weight. One has a red seal. You hold it differently. Your fingers sweat. It could be anything. It could change someone's life forever, or it could mean nothing. Either way, it is not yours to know. In a quiet hour before the midday meal, you are summoned to the Garden of Cultivated Harmony, a rare assignment. The Emperor will walk this afternoon, and someone must prepare the path. You sweep stone walkways lined with ancient cypress trees. You placed fresh tea on a marble table, chilled slightly with river stones. You adjust a wind chime. A concubine watches from a distant balcony. She doesn't speak. You don't look up. Eunuchs are not allowed to acknowledge the women unless spoken to. One wrong glance and your entire post can be stripped away. The emperor arrives, flanked by guards and shadowed by the chief scribe. You walk behind, silent, waiting for any gesture. He sits. You pour tea. The scribe hands him a scroll. You wait. The emperor reads slowly. His face is unreadable. He says something brief. The scribe nods. The guards remain motionless. You step forward, take the scroll, and return it to the Hall of Literary Glory. You are not told what it said. You do not ask. But as you leave, you hear the scribe sigh behind you deeply, as if something large has shifted in the invisible gears of governance. Back in the servants' hall, you eat quickly boiled cabbage and a small bun. No meat today. The senior eunuchs whisper among themselves. You catch only fragments. Someone has fallen from favor. Someone else has been reassigned to the outer gates. You keep your head low. Gossip is dangerous, but silence is safer than curiosity. Later, in the evening, you assist in the emperor's private study. This is the most delicate part of your day. The emperor is often tired, but sharp. He notices details. If a teacup is chipped, you will be blamed. If his inkstone is too dry, you will be summoned. He says little, but you have learned to read the small signals, the way he places his brush on the stand, the way he holds his elbow, the way he sighs without moving. His mouth, these are your cues. This is your language. As he writes, you wait nearby, still and alert. The candlelight flickers, the scrolls pile up. At one point, he pauses, glances briefly in your direction, and says, "Jinsha will no longer be needed." You bow. You do not react, but you know that. Jinsha was the eunuch assigned to the robe chamber. You shared meals with him. He has not been seen today. He will not be seen again. You walk back to your quarters, long after nightfall. The halls are quiet, but never truly still. You pass to guards whispering by the incense storeroom. You pass a young eunuch crying behind a pillar. You do not stop. You do not ask. You return to your cot, fold your robe, and lie down. Tomorrow will come. The dust will need sweeping again. The scrolls will need delivering. The silence will need maintaining. You stare at the ceiling and wonder, if you vanished tonight, who would notice? Who would care? How many days would pass before your name was spoken again? And even then, would they remember your face or just the tasks you performed? You close your eyes, knowing the answer doesn't matter. The cold has a way of settling deeper as you age in the Forbidden City. Not just in the bones, but in the spaces between memories where warmth used to live. Another year has passed, though you did not mark it. There were no candles, no greetings, not even a quiet acknowledgement from the others in your dormitory. You do not know how old you are anymore. 40, perhaps, maybe more. The court does not keep your age, only your service. Your title is higher. Now, you are a managing eunuch assigned directly to the Imperial household. You oversee a team of 16 junior eunuchs, each one careful around you, each one hoping to be noticed, but not too much. That is the secret. Rise quietly, fall even more quietly. You were like them once, watching the older ones for small signs of approval. Now, you are the one they watch. You offer no affection, only structure. They interpret your silences like scripture. Today is an auspicious day on the court calendar. The emperor will host a banquet for selected scholars, generals, and noble families. The hall of supreme harmony must shine. Every curtain, every step, every bowl must be flawless. You do not prepare the hall yourself anymore, you instruct. But you inspect everything. You pause to straighten a silk tassel. You notice when a ceremonial bowl is off-center by half an inch. Your eye is trained beyond habit. It is survival. Before the guests arrive, you supervise the clothing presentation. 3 robes, woven with gold thread, stitched by women who work without names. You carry the middle one yourself, not because you must, but because it must be done perfectly. As you walk, you remember the early years when your hands trembled under silk, when you feared dropping a cup or folding a robe the wrong way. Now, your fingers move without pause. You are no longer unsure, only tired. The emperor does not speak to you directly at the banquet. He rarely does. But you stand behind his chair as he listens to poetry from an aged scholar. You watch his body language. You know how much he has eaten, whether he's pleased, bored, or cold. You signal to the musicians when it is time to lower the volume. You nod subtly at the wine pourer when a guest has had too much. You run the event without a word. After the banquet, you return to your quarters, but not to rest. A letter has arrived. A new eunuch is being transferred into your supervision. He is 14, from Ennui province. The paperwork says he is willing, though you know better. You will meet him tomorrow. You already know what he will look like: thin, quiet, too frightened to speak. You will train him the same way you were trained. You will not comfort him, you will not lie to him. This life demands honesty, not softness. Sometimes you wonder if there is anything left of the boy you once were. The one who cried into a straw mat in his first week. The one who flinched at every raised voice. The one who believed, for a time, that being close to power might feel like power itself. You buried that boy in layers of obedience, discipline, and silence. You became what the palace required. Nothing more, nothing less. At night, you walk the corridors alone. You pass the hall of literary brilliance. You pass the sealed gate of the western courtyard, where retired concubines live out their final years in cloistered silence. You pause at a narrow window overlooking the central garden. The trees have bloomed again. Petals fall silently into the courtyard. No one notices them. No one remembers which tree dropped which petal. You used to think there would be a moment, some clear signal that your service was complete, that the emperor would speak your name with gratitude, that you would be permitted to leave, maybe to a temple, maybe to a quiet room by a river. But no such moment ever came. Promotions happened. Reassignments, new robes, new duties, but never rest, never release. The system does not let go. It absorbs, it forgets. You will not marry. You will leave no child. You will not be buried beside your parents. When you die, your body will be wrapped in yellow cloth, burned, and your ashes scattered near the temple of the eunuch ancestors. A wooden tablet with your new name not, your birth name, will be added to a wall with thousands of others. No one outside the palace will know what you did, how you served, how you endured. But tonight, you stand in the garden, beneath the moonlight, watching the wind play across the lotus pond. For a moment, there is no emperor, no scrolls, no rituals, just silence, the pure kind, not the fearful kind. You breathe in, you exhale, you exist, and maybe, in this single breath, you feel something that once resembled peace. You stand at the edge of the audience chamber, unmoving, eyes lowered. From a distance, you appear like any other eunuch in robes, calm, posture, hands folded. But this stillness masks something else. You are not just a servant in this court. You are one of its architects. The year is 1425, and the Ming Emperor relies on you more than he relies on his ministers. He does not say this openly, of course, no emperor ever would. But you know it's true. You have risen through the ranks, not by birth, or titles, or family alliances, but by watching, remembering, and never speaking a word more than needed. You are no longer behind the scenes. You are behind the throne. Your role is not ceremonial. You oversee the Imperial Bureau of Instructional Documents, one of the most delicate offices in the empire. You manage the messages that flow between the emperor and his ministers. You see every petition before it reaches his hand. You decide what is delayed, what is emphasized, what is never read at all. It is not called censorship. It is called loyalty. You learned early that the pen has more weight than the sword in this world. When the emperor yawns during an official's report, you are the one who drafts the record of the meeting, deciding whether that yawn was boredom, disappointment, or merely fatigue. It may sound like a small matter, but in the Ming court, those words shape careers. You can raise a man with 3 brush strokes, or you can destroy him with silence. The ministers know this. They resent you, of course, but they also depend on you. They offer gift silk, rare tea, even coins smuggled in lacquered boxes. You do not accept them, not because you are virtuous, but because you understand power better than they do. You know that accepting a bribe weakens your position. You do not want their gratitude. You want their caution. Sometimes you are summoned by the emperor himself. These meetings are brief, always at odd hours, always behind closed doors. He sits in plain robes, sometimes with his hair unbound, and speaks in clipped sentences. He asks for your thoughts, not just on court matters, but on people. He trusts your judgment, not because you are clever, but because you are neutral. You have no children to inherit your influence, no family to protect. You exist solely for the throne. You do not let this closeness make you bold. That is a mistake others have made. You remember Wang Zun, the powerful eunuch who once led military campaigns and wielded enormous influence. He believed he was untouchable. He began building temples in his own honor. The emperor tolerated it for a while. But when Wang Zun made a tactical blunder during a Mongol campaign and cost the empire thousands of lives, he was executed without ceremony. His ashes were scattered in a river. No one spoke his name again. You have no interest in glory. You prefer the shadows. While generals argue and ministers plead, you observe. You memorize patterns. You anticipate the mood of the court days before. It changes. When the emperor is restless, you schedule quieter rituals. When he is agitated, you ensure that fewer reports reach him. When he grieves, you delay all but the most urgent business. He never notices your hand. That is how you survive. Still, the burden is heavy. You are never off duty, even at night. When you lie in your quarters, you replay every conversation. Did you bow too long? Did your voice tremble when you read that report? Was the emperor's silence approval or warning? There is no manual for this kind of power. Only instinct. Only experience. Only fear. You remember the first time a minister knelt before you, asking you to advocate on his behalf. You were shocked. You had always knelt before others. Now, someone was kneeling for your favor. You said nothing, of course. You let him sweat in silence, then nodded faintly and walked away. Later, when you heard that his name had been cleared in a tax scandal, you said nothing again. He thinks you saved him. Maybe you did, but you never confirmed it. You never confirmed it. This is how you maintain your influence, not through declarations, but through ambiguity. You allow people to believe what they want to believe. You let them credit you with favors you never gave. You let them fear your wrath without ever raising your voice. You let the mystery do the work. In the daytime, you are seen everywhere and nowhere. You pass through chambers, carrying ledgers. You stand behind screens while meetings unfold. You whisper names to the chief usher when an audience is called. You appear beside the emperor when he rises. You vanish when he turns his head in the archives. A thick volume is being compiled, an official history of the reign. Your name will not appear in it. Or if it does, it will be buried in a footnote. That is expected. Historians are not meant to acknowledge the machinery of power, only the surface. But you are not concerned. You have shaped policy. You have removed traitors. You have ensured that petitions from the border provinces are not ignored. You have watched emperors rise, fall ill, and die. You have helped prepare the next one. You think sometimes about what it would mean to retire, to leave this life, to live simply in a small house far from the palace, with a garden and maybe a quiet pond. But you know it is not possible. No one who holds power this close can walk away from it. And even if you did, you would always wonder what was being said in your absence, which new eunuch was rising, whose scrolls were being approved without you, whether your absence would be noticed at all, so you remain. At your desk, your inkstone clean, your brush poised. The empire moves, and you move with it silently, invisibly, unacknowledged. The room is quiet, except for the slow scratching of your brush against silk-thin paper. You work in the small hours of the morning, when the city beyond the walls of the Forbidden City is still cloaked in night. These are your best hours. No interruptions, no footsteps in the corridor, no hushed conversations. Just the gentle rhythm of your work and the cold weight of the empire resting, for a moment, entirely on your shoulders. You are reviewing petitions, some written in elaborate prose, others plainly, almost desperately. A governor in Yunnan requests grain relief after a poor harvest. A border official in Liaodong reports sightings of armed riders. A Confucian scholar demands that temple tax exemptions be reinstated. Each scroll is a thread, and you are the one who decides which gets woven into the emperor's attention and which is quietly unraveled. You don't think of this as cruelty. You think of it as clarity. By now, the ministers know that nothing, reaches the emperor without first passing through your hands. They write differently because of it. They include subtle greetings meant for you. May this message be guided by wise judgment, or humbly presented with trust in palace discernment. They never name you, but you recognize your shadow in their ink. Sometimes they include tokens, a carved comb, a tiny seal, a poem scratched on a red slip of paper. You keep none of it. You burn everything that feels too familiar. Attachment is a softening you cannot afford. Later that morning, you are summoned to a private meeting with the emperor. The audience is brief. He is in a sour mood, pacing as he reads a military report from the northwest frontier. His words are few, sharp. He tosses the scroll onto the floor when he finishes. "This is unacceptable," he mutters. You wait silently. He doesn't ask for your opinion, but you know this is the moment. "Shall I draft an inquiry, Your Majesty?" you offer, softly. He nods, once, barely. That is all the permission you need. You return to your study and begin drafting an official reprimand. You know the names to mention. You know which sentences to sharpen and which to leave vague. You accuse no one directly. You suggest accountability. You let the emperor's displeasure fill the spaces between the lines. By the end of the day, a letter will be sent to the commandant, who will feel his position tremble. No orders of execution. Not yet, just the first crack in the surface. Power has made you precise. You no longer speak quickly. You no longer explain yourself. People lean in when you speak now. Even ministers with 24 attendants and family lineages stretching back centuries will fall silent when you raise your eyes. That silence used to unsettle you. Now, it is your language. In the late afternoon, a courier delivers a personal letter from a former eunuch, who now manages a temple outside Nanjing. You recognize the handwriting immediately. He was a friend once, if eunuchs are allowed such things. He writes of simple things, of a well that never runs dry, of birds that nest under the temple eaves, of mornings without orders. He invites you to visit, but you know you never will. You read the letter 3 times, then burn it without hesitation. You do not mourn the past. You cannot afford to. That night, you walk alone through the corridor behind the hall of mental cultivation. The floor is polished from generations of footsteps, but no one else is here now. You pause at a window and stare out into the darkness. The lanterns along the eaves burn low. Beyond the walls, the city breathes differently. There are markets, families, lovers, failures. A world you no longer belong to, though you were once part of it. You think of the emperor's face earlier. That day-tired, creased, hidden behind silk and etiquette. You think of how much of his burden is carried not by the throne, but by those who orbit it. People like you, people who exist only in records written in invisible ink. You wonder, if you vanished tomorrow, whether he would notice, whether he would feel the shift. But then a servant appears at the end of the corridor, running quietly toward you. She bows deeply, without speaking. You know what that means. Another summons, another late-night directive, another decision that must be made by candlelight. You nod, turn, and follow. You leave the window behind. You leave your thoughts behind, too. Because this is your purpose. To serve without pause. To think when others are not allowed to. To decide without being seen. You do not dream anymore. Sleep comes in short, shallow intervals, light, functional, like a soldier's march. You wake before dawn, not from noise or duty, but from the simple instinct that you must never let the day begin without you. The empire does not rest, so neither can you. You rise from your cot, dress in the dark, and walk into the corridors of the forbidden city like a ghost returning to its walls. Your body is slower now. The climb up stone stairs takes longer. Your knees ache in winter, but your mind is sharper than ever, honed by years of service, decisions, calculations. There is no file in the palace you haven't touched, no noble family whose history you do not know. You can read an official's posture like a scroll. You can feel deceit before a word is spoken. This is what your life has become, not living, but listening, watching, interpreting in the hall of administrative harmony. You are expected at the emperor's side as the court begins its day. He sits elevated on his throne, gold embroidery flashing in the filtered light. Ministers kneel, petitions are read, disputes are voiced. But you are not watching the emperor, you are watching the room. You note which noble glances sideways at another, who clears their throat before speaking, who dares to interrupt. This is where power lies, not in the words, but in the spaces between them. Later that day, you are asked to oversee a sensitive transfer, the reassignment of a regional governor whose loyalty has become ... uncertain. The emperor gives you a name, a vague instruction. He trusts you to understand what needs to happen. You write the transfer order, but you phrase it as a reward, not a demotion. You let the governor save face, while ensuring he has moved far from influence. No confrontation, no scandal, just silence. Clean and absolute. There are days when the emperor consults you more than his ministers. He asks how many ships are docked in Guangdong. He asks what rumors are circling in the southern provinces. You answer without hesitation, never embellishing. He once asked you why you never speculate. You told him the truth, because your Majesty's guesses are stronger than anyone else's certainty. He smiled faintly. That was the closest he's ever come to a compliment. You still eat alone, always have. Your meals are simpler, right? Boiled vegetables, maybe fish when the cooks remember. You sit in your quarters on a plain wooden stool beneath scrolls of court records. You eat quickly. There is always more to do. Messages to review, reports to annotate, imperial seals to verify. You have trained your staff well, but you rarely delegate. Not because you do not trust them, but because you cannot afford to. You have risen too high. And when you rise this high, there is no support, only scrutiny. At night, you sometimes reread the emperor's old letters. Not the official ones, but the brief, private notes he occasionally writes to himself, musings about stars, strange dreams, a bird he saw on a palace rooftop. He discards these notes without thought. You retrieve them quietly, not for curiosity, but for understanding. To know the emperor is to protect him, even from himself. Once, a younger eunuch asked you if you were proud. You didn't answer, not because you weren't, but because pride is dangerous here. To admit it is to invite jealousy. To show it is to become a target. You told him, instead, you must never want credit, only access. If you have access, you do not need credit. He didn't understand. Maybe he never will. Maybe that's for the best. You have lived in the Forbidden City longer than the emperor himself. You have seen 3 emperors come and go. You have written orders that altered borders, ended careers, and redirected armies. Why? Why? Yet you have never been named in the official records. Your life, to the historians, will be a blank margin, but that is how you intended it. Your power was never meant to be remembered, only exercised. You go to bed that night knowing that no statue will be built in your honor, no tablet inscribed with your story. But the empire still stands. It breathes because you keep its lungs clear. It thinks because you sort its thoughts. It moves because you lay down its path before it knows where it's going. And in that knowledge, quiet, heavy and complete, you finally feel something that almost resembles peace. The corridor smells faintly of roses and mildew. You have just passed through the double-arched gate into the inner court, a place where no ordinary man may walk. Here, every sound is muffled. Every footstep is measured. This is the Emperor's harem, the private sanctuary of women chosen from all corners of the empire. And you, a eunuch of the 6th rank, have been assigned to serve among them. You were told it was a great honor. You believed them. Your new post places you in the Hall of Benevolent Tranquility, one of the quieter residences within the Imperial harem. The consorts housed here are not favorites. Not anymore. Some are older. Some have fallen from favor. Others simply never caught the Emperor's eye. But even so, every concubine is still part of the Imperial household, and every moment of your presence among them must be as careful as balancing a candle flame in your palms. You are never to speak unless spoken to. You are never to lift your eyes unless instructed. And above all, you are never to be alone with a consort behind a closed door. It is not your fault what was done to your body, but it is your burden to carry its consequences in silence. The women in the harem wear silks so fine they make no sound when they move. Their robes are bright peach blossom, lilac, faded gold, but their expressions are dull. You see the same weariness in their eyes that you see in your own. A kind of hollow patience. They rise at appointed times, follow their routines, drink tea with the same rhythm each day, and wait for summons that may never come. One of them, Lady Hui, has been in the palace for nearly 20 years. Her hair is streaked with silver. She once bore the Emperor a child, a boy who died young. She rarely speaks. You refill her teacup twice a day. You adjust her curtains in the afternoon when the sun strikes her embroidery bench too harshly. She thanks you with a nod, never words. You have never heard her laugh. Another Lady Zhao is younger, newly arrived, still hopeful. She practices music at night when she thinks no one is listening, soft notes from a zither, plucked gently, cautiously. You sometimes pause at her door, just to hear the melody. It reminds you of the world outside, a place with sounds that are not footsteps or paper rustling. But you never stay long. Listening too long to anything beautiful in this place is dangerous. There are stories, whispered, about eunuchs who became too familiar with the women they served. Not in action, but in emotion. A conversation too long, a glance held too gently. One eunuch, they say, wrote poetry for a concubine. He was found. His tongue was cut out before he was exiled. No trial, no farewell, just disappearance. In the Forbidden City, such stories are not just warnings. They are instructions. You are not allowed to forget your place. You are not a man. Not to the palace, not to the court, not to yourself. Your days pass in loops. You clean inkstones, arrange hairpins, fetch cloaks when the wind shifts. You learn the preferences of each woman without asking who prefers jasmine, tea, who cannot sleep without incense, who becomes ill when the air is too damp. These small tasks define your world. You perform them perfectly, not out of love or pride, but out of necessity, to stay. Once, Lady Hui dropped a porcelain comb, and it cracked against the floor. You knelt to retrieve it, your head low. As you stood to hand it back, her eyes caught yours for a brief moment, just a flicker. Not kindness, not interest, just recognition. A reminder that even here, among women trapped in golden cages, there are still those who understand what it means to be watched, to be kept. Your sleeping quarters are separate-ways, strictly. You live with 2 other eunuchs, both older, both silent. You share no stories. There are no jokes. Only the slow rustle of robes as you undress, the sound of water being poured into basins, the occasional murmur of pain in the night as an old wound aches. There are moments when you forget what your voice sounds like at night. You lie in bed and listen to the palace breathe. You hear wind against carved eaves, the flutter of banners, a cough in the hallway. And sometimes, late, you hear soft crying from one of the chambers, a woman mourning a future she will never touch, a voice fading into silk. You do not respond. You turn on your side. You try not to feel anything, because to feel is to fall, and no one will catch you. The morning air in the inner court is strangely clean. It carries the scent of jasmine from the garden pavilions and the smoke of sandalwood rising from ceremonial braziers. You begin your day in silence, like every day, folding robes and setting trays of warm water outside chamber doors. You move like steam, present, necessary, but never solid. The women of the harem glide past you in bright silks and quiet glances, and you pass them like wind. You are there, and you are not. That is how you survive. Lady Zhao has stopped playing. Music, it's been 3 days now. You notice the absence, like a bruise you didn't know you had. Her chamber is quieter. She has taken to sitting by the window, watching the courtyard peach trees. You enter only to clean, to serve tea, to deliver fabric for her embroidery frame. She says nothing. You bow, turn, and leave. You're not meant to notice, but you do. You notice everything. Lady Hui has taken ill again. The physicians come and go, but no one seems overly concerned. She has been unwell before. The palace always has more remedies than care. You are told to keep the incense burning at her bedside and to place a hot stone beneath her blankets in the evening. She watches you as you do this. There is something in her eyes now, not sorrow, not fear, just exhaustion, pure and deep, the kind that's too old to speak. One afternoon, Lady Kong, a sharp-eyed woman in a red robe, calls you into her chamber without warning. You have served her before once. She was cold then. She is colder now. She hands you a small silk pouch and tells you to deliver it to a maid in another hall. You didn't see me, she says. You nod and take the pouch without opening it. You know better. You carry it under your robe and deliver it quickly, without eye contact, without a word. You do not ask what was in it. You do not wonder why it could not be delivered by a servant. You forget it the moment it leaves your hand. This is how you stay alive. That night, there is an incident. You hear the scuffle first, faint through the paper doors. Then raised voices, female voices, 2 of them. Not shouting, but something worse. Anger suppressed into sharp tones. Then silence, and then footsteps. Fast ones. You are summoned. Lady Zhao is crying, not loudly, but with her whole body. Her shoulders shake. Her hair is loose. Lady Kong stands near the door, watching with narrowed eyes. A junior eunuch is already in the room, too stiff with fear to move. You kneel, ask what is needed, but no one answers. Later, you learn the story in pieces. A gift meant for the emperor had gone missing. a silk handkerchief, hand-embroidered. Lady Zhao was blamed, though there's no proof. She was removed from the gift registry. The chance to be summoned, lost. You say nothing. You can say nothing. The next day, she is silent again, but something in her has changed. The hope is gone. Her zither sits untouched. She drinks her tea slowly and does not look out the window anymore. You fold her bedding with more care than usual, but you do not let your hands linger. You refill her inkstone and place her brushes precisely as she likes them. She does not thank you. In this world, grief is invisible, but it fills the room. You pass Lady Hui's chamber later and hear her breathing rasp through the curtain. You step inside to adjust the candlelight, and she speaks a soft word, your name, spoken like a memory. You pause. She asks for more tea. You prepare it. While the water boils, she speaks again. You've lasted a long time. She says. You nod, unsure if you're meant to reply. You watch. You remember. That's why they keep you. You bow, lower, slower than usual. It is the closest thing to an acknowledgement you've had in years, and yet it makes your chest tighten more than you expect. That evening, you return to your quarters. Wash your face, fold your robes, and lie down. You try not to think about the women. Not Lady Zhao, not Lady Hui, not the maid with the silk pouch. You try to empty your mind, but something gnaws at the edge of your sleep. What does it mean to live your entire life in a place where no one is allowed to love, where the eyes that see you must pretend they don't, and where your gentlest instincts are the ones that might destroy you? The days begin blending. The work never changes. You light incense. You sweep corridors. You wash linens and refill bowls of rose water. The women in the harem move through their own silent rituals, and you, the eunuch, orbit them without presence, without scent, without voice. You have become a piece of furniture, reliable, unthinking, invisible. But today, something does change. Lady Hui dies before sunrise. You are not there when it happens, but you are summoned before the sun rises, and you know the moment you step into her chamber, the air is too still. Her body is pale under layers of brocade. A maid kneels beside her, weeping softly, weeping softly. The head physician says it was the fever prolonged and quietly ignored for too long. You don't speak. You bow once, slowly, and begin your task. It is you who must prepare her body. You who must close her eyes. You whose hands gently smooth the folds of her final robe. The emperor will be notified. There will be a short mourning ceremony, attended only by a few. She will not be buried with fanfare, for she had not been favored for many years. Her name will not be carved into a shrine. She will be folded into silence, like all the rest. Later, you overhear Lady Zhao speaking in hushed tones with another consort. The tone is bitter, tight. That's how we all end, she says. Faded, unmentioned. You pass without letting them know you've heard. But the words stay with you like ash on your sleeve. The following days are colder. Rain clings to the roof tiles and drips into the gardens. The harem is quieter than usual. Even Lady Kong seems less sharp. The emperor does not visit. The women grow restless. You can feel it coiled frustration wrapped in silence. Everything beautiful is stagnant here. The silk, the songs, the laughter that never comes. The women wait to be noticed, and you wait to be ignored. But the world inside you does not stay still. At night, you remember Lady Hui's words, that you lasted because you remembered. But what is the use of remembering a life no one else once recalled? the gifts you've carried, the glances you've absorbed, the suffering you've passed by without blinking. You've become a vessel of memory for things the Empire has forgotten. One night, Lady Zhao calls for you. You enter quietly. She is seated at her table, brush in hand, writing a letter. She asks you to deliver it not to another consort, not to the Emperor, but to the Empress Dowager. A breach of protocol, a direct violation. You do not answer. You do not move. She looks up at you, not pleading, expecting. You lower your eyes. I cannot. Her hands tremble slightly, and she turns back to the paper. Then why do you watch me? She asks. You say nothing. Why do you listen to my music and look at me like I matter? If you're going to be just like the others, you want to explain that you didn't mean to, that silence is not consent, that you only ever meant to serve, that you wish she hadn't noticed you noticing her. But you can't, because she's right. You watched, you listened, you remembered, and now none of that helps her. You bow, lower than you ever have before, and leave the room without looking. Back. The next day, she will not speak to you. The zither remains untouched. The curtains remain closed. You continue your duties. You polish lantern stands. You clean hair combs. You fold undergarments made of silk so light they slip between your fingers like water. One morning, a new consort arrives. She is young, wide-eyed, frightened. You guide her through her first steps, where to stand, how to greet, which rooms to avoid. You explain nothing about the life that waits ahead of her. You only teach her the motions, just as someone once did for you. Later that week, you are summoned to the office of palace service. Your supervisor, an older eunuch whose name you've never been told, informs you of your next assignment. You are being rotated out of the inner court. You are to serve in the hall of heavenly purity, assisting with document sealing and calendar preparation, a higher honor, a quieter life. You bow, thank him, and walk away without showing anything on your face. But that night, in the darkness of your quarters, you sit beside your lamp long after it's gone out, and you let the silence press against you. You realize you will not hear Lady Zhao's music again. You will never refill Lady Hui's tea. You will walk new halls, see new faces. But none of these changes will change you, because the eunuch never truly leaves. You carry the walls inside you. You carry the silence, and the faces, and the rooms that smelled of jasmine and dying things. And even when you are gone and the records forget your name, the memory will remain in the corridors, in the way you folded silk, in the way you watched without speaking, in the music no one plays anymore. You arrive before the sun. The corridor of the Grand Secretariat is dim, still lit by last night's lanterns, their wax pooled into quiet shapes along the floor. You carry no sword, no badge, no color brighter than the parchment you serve. You are a eunuch scribe, assigned to the inner workings of the Ming administration, not to handle gold, not to handle emperors, but to handle paper, scroll after scroll, record after record. The others are already seated when you enter. Rows of eunuchs, like monks at prayer, hunched over long wooden tables. Brushes rise and fall in silence. The only sound is ink on silk, measured and exact. The head eunuch nods as you take your place. No greetings are exchanged. Here words are reserved for writing, not speaking. The Secretariat is the brain of the Empire. The Emperor commands, but the Secretariat remembers. Edicts, harvest reports, census data, disciplinary rulings, provincial petitions, Every thread of government passes through this hall. You don't decide what is true. You decide what is recorded. That is far more dangerous. Your first task is a compilation of grain shortages across the northern provinces. The data arrives, messy contradictory reports, missing signatures, figures altered by frightened governors trying to preserve their positions. You read each scroll carefully, weighing not just what is written, but what has been erased. You are expected to summarize it for the emperor's ministers. You choose your brushstrokes with surgical care. You note the omission of militia reports. You highlight the absence of spring taxes. You do not accuse. You simply present the quiet facts, trimmed to the right length, using the right tone. You are not a politician, but your phrasing might start a chain of investigations that ends in exile for a dozen officials, and no one will ever know your name. You are not always a scribe. Before this, you spent 10 years in the Hall of Celestial Harmony, where you managed the robes for morning rituals. Before that, you fetched water for the Imperial kitchens. Each promotion felt like a victory, though the world outside the Forbidden City forgot you more with each step. You have not seen your birthplace in decades. You forget whether your mother had moles on her face or not. You remember the smell of boiling cabbage and the sound of a dog barking by the river. That's all that's left. The day drags on without pause. You break for a bowl of rice and salted greens just after midday, but even then, your fingers move restlessly. You think in columns of names, in population estimates, in dry, bureaucratic phrases. You correct errors in stroke order before the ink has even dried. You have become your writing, neat, erased when inconvenient. Sometimes you wonder who reads your work. Perhaps the emperor glances at it, or maybe a censor reviews the summary before discarding the scrolls into an archive. No one visits. Perhaps what you record becomes a footnote in a court historian's book, a vague reference to irregularities in the region of Shaanxi. Perhaps it's never read at all, but you write it anyway, because that is your duty. There are stories among the eunuchs, rumors of others who reshaped the empire from this very hall. One scribal eunuch altered the emperor's speech by changing a single character. A mistake, they say. But the shift in meaning led to war. The eunuch was not punished. The emperor never noticed. The ministers did. And they've feared this hall ever since. You do not seek such influence. You do not want to be remembered for a war. You want to be correct in the late afternoon. You are called to review a backlog of memorials sent from distant provinces, some over a year old. Many have not even been opened. The palace is overwhelmed, and the Grand Secretariat is too large, too slow, too full of secrets. You work late into the evening, reading appeals for flood relief, border reinforcements, and temples collapsing from disrepair. The ink is faded, the paper brittle. Some of the officials who wrote these are probably dead. You wonder if anyone ever came to help them. Probably not, as the lanterns are extinguished one by one, and the hall empties. You remain at your desk, organizing scrolls into neat stacks. The world you live in is not one of swords and ceremony, but of whispers hidden inside the margins of court records. You do not speak your opinions aloud, but they exist embedded between characters, masked in your punctuation, suggested in the order you present things. You are not voiceless. You are encoded. And if you disappeared tomorrow, another would take your place. Another quiet eunuch, trained to hold the empire together with brush and silence. But you don't disappear. Not yet. You dip your brush into fresh ink and begin the next report. The lantern above your desk flickers in the still air, casting pale yellow light across scrolls that feel older than memory. It is well past curfew in the secretariat, but you remain seated, hands still stained with ink, back aching from a day spent bent like a reed. You know the risks of staying this late-night patrols, suspicions, exhaustion, but the task is not yet finished. A tax reform document has been returned to your table, marked with a red line drawn not by a minister, but by a censor, a single line through a date. The correction is subtle, but it changes everything. Focus on the new aid from Suzhou, or ignore the recent temple gossip. You follow without question. You do not ask who reads your words, or what they are used for. You do not need to know at night. When the halls grow quiet, you return to your quarters with the slow grace of a man who has learned not to leave footprints. The palace guards nod at you, thinking you insignificant. But you know which of them drinks too much rice wine. You know which one was seen near the chamber of a favored consort last week. You file it all away. One evening, you are summoned unexpectedly to the upper court, not through a formal order. A maid delivers a plain slip of paper to your quarters. Come, it reads, with no seal, no signature. You go. You are led into a room lit only by a single lamp. There, a figure waits behind a screen. You do not see him. You do not speak unless addressed. A voice slow asks you a single question. What do you know about the envoy from Enem? You recite what you've observed. His carriage had extra guards. He met privately with 2 senior scribes. His gifts to the emperor were inspected longer than usual. You mention, carefully, that he carries a book of poetry in classical Chinese, but he never opens it. You suspect the book hides something, perhaps a cipher. The voice behind the screen says nothing for a while. Then, you will be assigned to his detail tomorrow. You bow, you leave. You do not sleep that night. The next morning, you are suddenly promoted to assist in foreign envoy protocol, a task far above your station. No one questions it. The palace assumes you are favored. In truth, you are bait. For 3 days, you accompany the envoy's party through the inner courts. You offer tea, you manage scrolls. You remain quiet, but your true task is to listen not to what the envoy says, but to what he avoids. You note how he reacts when trade routes are mentioned. You notice how often he refers to a great wind that has disturbed their journey, a phrase repeated so often it becomes suspicious. Quietly copy his phrases at night. You pass them to your contact. You never learn what happens after. But 3 days later, the envoy departs in haste, without ceremony. A scroll is circulated announcing a sudden illness that shortened his stay. In truth, he was found with a second copy of the trade route map, one never given to him. He was caught, quietly, efficiently. You never hear of him again. Your role continues. You do not carry blades. You do not threaten or punish. You watch. You memorize. You disappear. Sometimes you catch a reflection of yourself in a polished urn or a lacquered screen. You barely recognize the man who looks back, a eunuch with no name beyond the registry, a shadow cast by other shadows. You feel no pride, no fear, only purpose. You think back to the boys you trained with years ago. One was clever, always talking. He vanished after a scroll went missing. Another was quiet but slow. He was reassigned to the stables. You survived not because you were the best, but because you understood the silence, because you know that in the palace, truth doesn't scream. It whispers. Your new assignment takes you beyond the palace walls, an unusual order for a eunuch, but not unprecedented for those in your line of work. The message is handwritten in a cipher only a handful of men in the capital can read. It gives no names, no rationale location, a monastery on the outskirts of Beijing, nestled against the curve of a forgotten hill. You travel dressed as a courier. Simple clothes, muted colors, no insignia. You carry no written order, only the weight of expectation. The man you are to observe is a former tax inspector turned monk. He retired under sudden circumstances. There are whispers he kept records no one asked for, copies of land surveys, notes on bribes, sealed letters from minor lords now in exile. You arrive at the monastery just before dusk. The place smells of pine and slow-burning oil. Monks sweep the paths without urgency. You are given a sleeping mat, a bowl of barley kanji, and no questions. The man you've come for doesn't notice you, pretends not to. He is older, hunched slightly from years of record-keeping. His robes are worn thin at the edges. He tends the incense altar in silence, but he watches the younger monks with a kind of wariness that catches your attention. You wait 3 days before making contact. You sit beside him during evening meditation, speaking softly. There are edicts missing from the Yongle archives. Some say you saw them. He doesn't answer. But the next morning, you find a folded paper tucked beneath your mat. One line only. If memory were dangerous, I would be dead already. You spend a week there, watching, listening. He writes nothing. He speaks even less. But each night, he leaves a single slip of paper in your bowl. Names, dates, moments, you cross-reference with events long thought trivial. A road dispute in Fujian. A ship never recorded as arriving. A tax collector who built a shrine out of bribes. One day, he leaves no note. And the next, he is gone. The monks say nothing. They simply clean his chamber and burn his robe as if he were already ashes. You search the room, but find nothing. No secret compartment, no scroll. Just a single brush, worn down to a stump, and a blank sheet of paper resting flat on the floor. You pocket the brush. You burn the paper. When you return to the palace, no one asks about the mission. Your report is silent, as ordered. But the information finds its way into footnotes and advisory memos. A transfer is denied. A construction project in Fujian is delayed. A seemingly loyal official is passed over for promotion. All quiet consequences, all born of invisible ink. You resume your work in the palace, blending back into your former routines. But things are not quite the same. There's a new pressure now, kind of quiet respect in the way higher eunuchs nod at you. A minister lingers half a moment too long in your presence. You are seen, even if no one acknowledges it, and with that comes danger. One morning, you find a message on your table, placed with such precision it could only have come from within the spy network itself. There are those who remember what you forget. It is not a threat. It is a reminder. You spend your next weeks moving carefully. You speak less. You write less. You listen more. You begin noticing oddities against servants who linger too long near the record halls. Ministers who enter from side passages without attendance. You make notes, but only in your mind. You do not write them down. Eventually, your supervisor returns. He appears, as he always does, silent, cold, composed. He places a single scroll in front of you, sealed in black wax. You do not open it immediately. You wait until he leaves. Inside. A reassignment. You are being moved to the Office of Imperial Household Provisioning, overseeing grain flow, palace expenses, personnel. On the surface, a demotion. In reality, a deeper cover. You understand now. You are being placed closer to the Empire's pulse, because influence in the Forbidden City does not come from what you command, it comes from what you observe without reaction, what you remember without acknowledgement. You pack your few belongings. You take the old brush from the monastery. You leave behind no letters, no farewell. By nightfall, you are in your new quarters, a smaller room, no windows, just ledgers, receipts, and the occasional whispered order delivered between candle flickers. You breathe once, deeply, then you open the first ledger, and begin again. The records in the Office of Imperial Household Provisioning are not written in blood, but they might as well be. Every sack of grain delivered to the Emperor's table, every bolt of silk measured for an imperial robe, every coin paid to a servant, all of it flows through these ledgers. It is here that the Empire's truth lies hidden, not in grand proclamations, but in numbers that don't add up. You don't need permission to notice the irregularities. A sudden surge in rice allocation to a pavilion known to be empty. A payment issued twice for the same shipment. A robe tailored for an official no longer alive. These are not accidents. These are messages. And you read them fluently now. You've learned not to react. Instead, you begin compiling your own ledger privately. In cipher, on wax paper strips that can be melted in an instant. You keep them hidden in the lining of your robe. They contain only patterns, no accusations, just events and times. They make no claims. They only suggest. Your presence in the office draws little attention. To the others, you are another eunuch. Among many quiet, efficient, unambitious. You hand out provisions and collect receipts. But slowly, you begin to rearrange things. You change the order in which papers are reviewed. You misplace records for a day, just long enough to shift their usefulness. You assign junior eunuchs to postings where their silence will be most valuable. And then one night, a courier arrives at your door. He does not speak. He hands you a single, unmarked envelope and disappears into the darkness before you can ask a question. Inside is a name, a eunuch, one of your own, someone you know. He works in the Pavilion of Celestial Harmony. He cleans the lanterns, keeps to himself, never speaks. He was trained alongside you in silence years ago. The message gives no instruction, just the name. But you understand, they want him watched or removed. You wait 3 days before taking action, not because you are uncertain, but because you are remembering. This man once shared his rice with you. He once whispered a warning that saved you from punishment. He once told you he'd dreamt of walking out of the palace barefoot into the mountains. Now he is a risk, or maybe he's not. Maybe the message is a test for you. You visit his post one evening, under the pretext of checking an inventory request. He recognizes you, nods slightly, but does not speak. His eyes have changed. He looks past you when you speak. He smells, faintly, of camphor and old parchment. You return to your quarters. You sit for a long time in the dark, and then you do nothing. You send no report. You burn the name. You close the ledger. 2 weeks later, he vanishes. No announcement. No records. His belongings cleared within hours. A replacement already assigned. You are not punished. No questions are asked. But in the hallway, the head clerk of provisioning passes you slowly and does not bow. That is message enough. You begin. Sleeping with your robe on, now, just in case. In the following weeks, you are assigned a new role, reviewing excess expenditure claims. A fancy name for deciding who eats well and who doesn't. You make cuts with caution. You reward loyalty. You deny requests without explanation. At night, you light a candle and think of the eunuch who vanished. You wonder whether he ever walked, barefoot, as he hoped, or whether he was only buried beneath the stone walls he once helped keep so clean. The palace grows quieter in the winter. Ministers travel less. The emperor withdraws into his private chambers. The courtiers murmur about snow falling early in the northern provinces. But beneath it all, the machine still runs, the gears oiled by silence. The axles turned by eunuchs no one names. You remain where you are, at your desk, in the shadows. The empire sleeps because you do not. And when history is written, when the scrolls are unrolled and the names of generals and emperors are inked in vermilion, you will not be mentioned, but the lines between their names. That is where you have lived. The vault lies beneath 7 locked doors. Each key is carried by a different eunuch. You are the 7th. They call you Keeper of the Seal, but the title means little outside the treasury. You are not adorned with ribbons, nor do you sit at the emperor's side during court. Your job is to know what enters, what leaves, what is real, what is imitation. The imperial treasury is more than gold and jade. It is memory concentrated into objects. You watch over them as if they were sleeping gods. You descend into the vault each morning with the other 6. No one speaks. You each unlock your door, one after the other, the clinking of ancient iron echoing like a ritual. Inside, the air is still, dustless, thick with something that feels older than breath. It smells of lacquer, dry silk, and old coins like time turned into scent. The walls gleam with shelves. There are robes that once wrapped the bones of dead. Emperors, there are jade scepters, too small to wield, yet heavy enough to mean war. There are scrolls that haven't been unrolled since the last dynasty fell. And there is gold thousands of tales, packed in bricks and bars and bowls, all recorded with meticulous detail. Your task is simple. On paper, inventory, inspection, preservation. But what you really do is remember, because the records lie. The ministers lie. Even the emperor forgets. But the vault does not lie, and you are its memory. Each object is catalogued with a code. Each withdrawal requires a signature. Every discrepancy must be explained. You have grown used to finding things unmarked, small trinkets tucked between more valuable goods, hidden away like secrets. Sometimes you leave them untouched. Sometimes you quietly log them with a new entry and a false date. It is not deception. It is protection. You know what would happen if some of these treasures became known again. One such item is a small obsidian box, sealed in wax, with no record attached. It has been there since before your time. Older eunuchs speak of it only in whispers. The shadow box, they call it. No one opens it. No one asks. And so you let it be, tucked behind a ceremonial spear wrapped in crimson cloth. You clean around it, dust its edges. You do not break the seal. Sometimes ministers request loans. From the treasury, a ceremonial robe for a visiting envoy, a jeweled pendant to reward a loyal general. You prepare the items. You log their departure. You record whether they ever return, which increasingly they don't. You do not complain. But in your own private ledgers, you record these disappearances in red ink. Not for revenge, for the record. One day, Someone will want to know what was lost, or who lost it. You live in a small chamber adjacent to the lowest vault hall. There is no window. Your lamp burns low. You eat alone. The silence comforts you. You have become like the golden moving, ageless, kept beneath layers of stone and protocol. Once a month, you are inspected. A superior from the court of Imperial supplies comes to review your work. He asks no questions. He reads your ledgers with an expression that reveals nothing. You offer him tea. He never drinks it. When he leaves, he nods, wonder, small, rare. Acknowledgement. You are doing your job. You are not meant to be seen. But things begin to shift. First, a new eunuch is assigned to assist UA boy, barely past training, too eager, too curious. He asks about the obsidian box on his second day. You do not answer. He asks again a week later. You tell him if it ever needed to be opened, someone would have opened it. He nods, but he does not understand. He thinks silence is a prison. He does not yet know it is also a shield. Then an Imperial edict arrives. A large withdrawal is ordered: gilded armor, ceremonial jade tablets, and a portion of the southern tribute gold. More than usual. Too much. You prepare it anyway. You wrap each item in silk, secure each tally slip, check every weight twice. When the guards arrive to collect it, you say nothing. But in your private record, you add a line: withdrawal requested. Beyond standard ratio. Motive unclear. Proceeded per duty. That night, the boy asks you, "Why don't we say something?" You answer without looking up, because when the roof begins to crack, the pillar does not ask. White just holds. He doesn't understand, not yet. You stay late, rechecking the vault, walking its silent aisles. You pass the spears, the jewels, the folded flags of long-lost provinces, and always the obsidian box, waiting, still sealed. You sit beside it for a moment, just to feel its quiet. You run your fingers along its wax. The seal has never cracked, yet somehow you feel as if it watches you. You don't open it. Instead, you return to your desk and write one more entry, just for yourself. There are truths heavier than gold. We guard both. It begins with silence, deeper than usual. A kind of stillness that doesn't belong in the treasury halls. The air feels pressed, like a breath held too long. You unlock the doors one by one with the other 6 keepers, but no one speaks. You all feel it, though no one says it. Something has changed. When you reach the final chamber, the change is not in what is missing, it's in what has moved. A scroll cabinet has shifted by a finger's breadth. The fabric on the wrapping of a jade seal is slightly creased, as though lifted and replaced by hands, not yours. The golden breastplate assigned to the Emperor's spring parade is sitting half an inch off its usual line. These are not mistakes. They are warnings. You wait until the other eunuchs leave for their day's rotations, then lock the 7th door behind you again. Alone, you return to the central vault, and for the first time in many years, you break protocol. You examine the obsidian box. The seal is intact, but the dust around it disturbed. You've never touched it directly. No one has. But someone did recently. You do not open it. Instead, you return to your chamber and pull out the red ledger, the one no one else knows exists. You add a simple note. Box may have been moved. Keyholder number 3, or unauthorized access suspected. Recommend observation. You leave the note unsigned, but you know the right eyes will see it. Your reports have always been read by more than one. pair of eyes, even if they never answer. That night, the young assistant does not return to his quarters. His cot is empty, his clothes neatly folded, his ledger missing. You say nothing. You light your lamp. You return to your desk. 3 days later, an Imperial announcement is made, an inventory audit of the inner treasury. A rare event. Dangerous. Not for the Emperor's benefit. No, this is something else. A purge is coming. You work quickly, quietly. You clean up the logs. You rewrite older entries to clarify their meaning. You remove anything ambiguous. You leave. Only what must be seen. Everything else you burn line by line, until only your memory holds the truth. The auditors arrive wrapped in formality robes, thick with symbols, tone sharpened with suspicion. They do not ask about missing items directly. They ask about procedures, timing, locks, weight tallies. They are looking not for theft, but for deviation. A wrong number might mean you've grown to independence, too confident. You answer with clarity. You offer tea, they do not drink. One asks you about the boy. You respond, he left no trace. We assumed he was reassigned. They do not believe you, but they also do not press when they leave. They take one thing with them, a small lacquered box, marked as tribute from the Southern Fleet, not the obsidian, one that remains untouched. Watching. Later that week, you receive a silk scroll folded in half, tied with a black threaden internal message. No seal, just a line. We acknowledge your silence. Maintain it. You understand. The vault has always been full of treasure. But it's never really been about gold. It's about knowing who touches what and when. It's about understanding that what disappears often says more than what remains. And it's about surviving long enough for someone to need your memory. You have outlived 3 emperors. You have overseen the rotation of guards, the rise and fall of favorites, the vanishing of 2 ministers. You have never once spoken of what you saw. You are the vault. One evening, just before the lanterns are extinguished, you visit the obsidian box again. You sit beside it, as you always do, but this time you reach out and place your hand gently on the wax, not to open it, only to remind it that you are still here, and that you remember. The fire is slow to take. But once it starts, it cannot be stopped. It begins in the northeast storehouse of the outer treasury and old structure, mostly used for aging grain reserves and ceremonial cloth, far from the central vaults. But flames, like rumors, move fast. By the time the alarm is raised, half the east wing is in smoke. Servants run barefoot on stone. The guards are overwhelmed. You, however, remain seated, because you know this was no accident. Fires in the Forbidden City are not rare, but this one comes with too many coincidences. Just days before, the auditors returned for a second inspection. A third keyholder suddenly fell ill, and the northern inventories, usually irrelevant, were requested for review. As the flames burn outside, you stay in the lowest chamber of the vault, the doors sealed. The air is calm here. You feel no heat, only the press of stone and the silence of things that have waited centuries. You sit before the obsidian box. You place your hand on it. One final time, and then you do what you've never done. You open it. The seal breaks with a whisper, no louder than a breath. Inside, no treasure, no letter, only a single folded sheet of yellowed paper, ink faded by time and secrecy. You lift it carefully. The calligraphy is unmistakably imperial, but not recent. It is a decree, an unsigned, unfinished edict, dated more than 100 years ago. Its contents, in order to disband the eunuch corps entirely, to strip the court of all eunuch authority and return control of the inner palace to the Ministry of Rights. A political shift so massive it would have rewritten the structure of the dynasty, never issued, never finalized, hidden by someone like you. You understand now why the box was never spoken of, why it remained untouched. It is not a threat. It is a memory, a weapon only in the hands of those who remember. A warning carved in ink. You reseal the box with fresh wax. You record nothing, you tell no one, because some truths are not meant for scrolls. Outside, the fire dies by morning. The east wing is lost. Two minor clerks perish. A few ledgers are declared destroyed. You suspect more was lost intentionally. In the days that follow, there is no announcement. The incident is buried beneath festival preparations. A new jade lion is erected in front of the Imperial audience hall. A distraction, but those in power know. And they watch you more closely now. They still nod when you pass, but their eyes linger. Your meals are inspected. Your sleep is no longer undisturbed. You keep to your duties. You inventory the robes, the beads, the gifts from Korea and anime. But always you remember the edict, the hand that almost erased your kind, the silence that preserved you. One evening, a young girl, perhaps 10, arrives with a note. She is a servant of one of the lower consorts, barely trusted to carry water, but her eyes are sharp. The note is folded in fifths, thin as rice skin. Inside, the seal has been seen. Leave it where it lies. You are not alone. That night, you dream for the first time in years. In it, you walk the vault barefoot, your fingers brushing the edges of forgotten swords, moonlight filtering through stone. The obsidian box is gone. In its place, a mirror. And in the mirror, yourself, young, frightened, and free. When you wake, you do nothing unusual. You eat your rice. You light your lamp. You open the first ledger of the day, because the empire needs memory, and you are the only one left still carrying it. They call it the inner court, but it is a world unto itself, its own seasons, its own laws, its own quiet wars. It is a garden fenced with gold and silk, where the emperor's women live behind painted screens and closed doors. Most men will never see it. Most women never leave it. But you live between them. You were assigned here not by choice, but because of your silence. Because you never asked questions. Because your face does not betray thought. The chief attendant called it a promotion. You understood it was a sentence. The women call you he with a strange tone, some cold, some kind, most unsure. You are neither threat nor comfort. You are a shadow given hands, and yet they speak in front of you as if you are furniture, as if your ears cannot hear the poison in their words, but you hear everything. You learn quickly which consort is favored this season, and which has fallen out of favor. You learn who receives fresh fruit from the emperor's own orchard, and who is left with dried lotus seeds. You notice when a robe has not been mended, or when a hairpin is missing from its usual place. You learn to step lightly in the hall of fragrant dew. The consorts play games of Go and pretend not to watch each other's reflections in the polished tiles. They speak of poetry, of dreams, of omens. But behind every verse is a rivalry. Behind every smile, a calculation. You are tasked. with daily records, which dishes were served, which gifts were exchanged, who arrived late to morning bowing. These logs are meant to be dull, but you know better. One morning, the junior consort Gia arrives with a bruise on her wrist. She claims it was from slipping on the stone path near the koi pond, but you saw her trip no such way. You know, lady. Anne has taken offense at Gia's rise in favor. The bruise was no accident. You record it, as she says, slipped while walking alone. You do not lie, but you do not tell the whole truth. That is the art of survival. The women grow used to you. In time, some speak to you openly. They ask how their hair looks, or whether the embroidered dragons on their robes seem bold enough. They ask, not expecting honesty, but reassurance. You offer neither, only what is necessary. But one, Lady Keon, is different. She never looks you in the eye. She always addresses you with the formality used for senior officials, even though you are only a eunuch. She never lets her guard down, not even when alone. You watch her closely. She receives few visitors. No letters, no gifts. And yet, her chamber always smells faintly of burning paper. She orders more incense than any other woman in the palace. One day, when replacing her scroll rack, you find a set of ashes that do not match incense at all. To coarse, the scent, to bitter, burnt messages. She notices you've seen, but says nothing. Later, she leaves you a single almond cake on your desk. No note, no word, just the offering. You do not eat it, but you understand. She, too, remembers the price of being watched in the evenings. When the halls grow still and only the soft clink of jade bangles fills the air, you walk the inner garden paths alone. The lanterns flicker like fireflies caught in a net. You listen to the wind move through the willow trees, and sometimes you forget the court exists. You are just a man with no name, among women with no freedom, breathing the same confined air. One night you hear weeping, not loud, but steady. It leads you to a side hall used for prayer during the spring ceremonies. Inside, Lady Wren kneels before the altar. Her hands are clenched, not in prayer, but in fury. She does not see you, or maybe she does, and no longer cares. She whispers, "Why does he not even look at me?" You back away, as silent as shadow. You never write this down, because some truths do not belong in the record. You begin to keep your own private list, not of gossip, not of scandal, but of small cruelties. Missed birthdays, unanswered poems, cut sleeves turned away. Not because you mean to use them, but because you need to. Remember, these women were human before they were ornaments. And you wonder, do they remember that you were once human too? You wash the floors. You carry the trays. You announce the emperor's arrivals, though he rarely comes. Most nights, the women sit in their chambers, dressed for a man who never appears. They stare into mirrors until the candles die. They wear their beauty like armor, but armor weighs something, so do you. The rains arrive earlier than expected that year, turning the stone paths slick and the gardens into shallow lakes. The concubines remain indoors, pacing perfumed halls, restless with damp boredom. The emperor has not visited the inner court in over 3 weeks. His absence lingers like mildew on silken spoken, but impossible to ignore. You spend your mornings drying scrolls and ordering fresh tea deliveries. The women grow more tense with each passing day. Tempers fray over seating positions during poetry readings. A single withered flower in an offering tray becomes a reason for accusation. The air is thick with unspoken rivalries and the slow unraveling of hope. One morning, a fight breaks out. Not loud, not dramatic, just sudden. Lady Anne strikes junior consort Gia with a comb made of mother of pearl. It snaps in half on impact. Gia bleeds just above the eyebrow. Two attendants scream. You are the first one there. The protocol is clear. Report to the matron of the ward. Document the injury. Alert the attending physician and update the daily incident log. You do none of these. Instead, you retrieve a white handkerchief. You press it gently to Gia's wound. She doesn't look at you. Lady Anne says nothing. She smooths her robe, breathes deeply, and leaves the room. Gia cries without sound. That night, you rewrite the incident log. You do not falsify it to simply omit it. The pages show only: Gia retired early due to headache. Recommended rest. You hide the blood-stained handkerchief in the base of a prayer urn. You sleep little. Later that week, a gift arrives for you. An embroidered pouch, navy blue, stitched with tiny chrysanthemums. Inside, 3 dried apricots, soft, sweet. You don't need a name to know it was from her. Lady Anne doesn't forget, though the following month your chamber is searched. Not openly, not officially, but things are moved. A drawer sits slightly, ajar. The lid of your inkstone isn't quite aligned. Someone has gone looking for what you don't know, but they find nothing. Your records are clean, your words dull. You have built your silence like a wall. You begin walking the gardens later. Now, just before the 3rd watch bell, in the darkness, you begin to notice others walking too. Not the women, ever them. Other eunuchs, silent, thoughtful. You nod at one another without speaking. All of you are watchers, wrapped in other people's sorrow. One evening, Lady Keon approaches you as you arrange the incense for the hall of everlasting fragrance. I need a message delivered, she says softly, her gaze fixed on the flickering brazier. Not through paper, not through speech. You say nothing, she continues. Tell him, I still remember the sparrow. She leaves without waiting for a response. You don't know who he is. Perhaps no one does anymore. Perhaps it doesn't matter. But a week later, a carved sparrow no bigger than a fingernail peers at the edge of her mirror stand. You didn't place it there, but someone did. You're not alone. Then, in the inner court, small acts of remembrance are louder than rebellion. A note never sent, a wound never named, a favor returned without ceremony. The eunuchs trade in these things. The women survive by them. You begin to write again, not ledgers, not reports, just a small, private record. Each entry starts the same. She waited. She waited at the bridge until the candles went out. She waited with her hair pinned, but was never called. She waited with songs on her lips and no one to sing to. You do not show these pages to anyone. They're not meant for court. They are for remembering, for proving that someone saw them, truly saw them. Because in the palace, beauty is a currency, youth an hourglass. But memory is resistance, and you are its keeper. Spring arrives like a whisper, not a celebration. Peach blossoms bloom inside the walled garden, but no one comes to admire them. The emperor has turned his attention elsewhere, away from the inner court, away from the women who once made poetry from longing. The palace musicians still rehearse their tunes, but fewer consorts request them. The silk robes remain folded. The jewels remain untouched. You continue your work. You sweep the thresholds. You adjust the lanterns. You announce the meals in a clear, even voice. You are invisible, as you have always been. But more and more, the women look at Eunuch with curiosity or condescension, but with something closer to recognition. They see that you, too, have been left behind by someone who promised to remember. Lady Keon stops asking about incense. Lady Gia spends long hours staring at the sky from behind the screen. Lady Anne, still sharp, still dangerous, begins to walk. Slower, pausing more often at windows she never used to glance through. They are not growing old. They are becoming still, and so are you. You receive a letter not from the court, not from an official. It arrives hidden inside a shipment of ceremonial tea, folded into the corner of the wrappings. Unsigned, it reads, "The inner court will be reduced. A third of the women reassigned. Some dismissed, some sent to temples. No names listed. Prepare yourself." You burn the letter after reading it once. You don't speak of it, but the days that follow are heavy with tension. Each time the chief matron enters the corridor, the consorts straighten their robes, their eyes fixed on the smallest changes in her expression. Lady Keon begins lighting her incense twice each night. Lady Gia writes poems on scraps of silk and hides them behind her mirror. Lady Anne prepares a box. Not her most expensive jewels, just a few brushes, a bronze mirror, a wooden comb. A quiet act of surrender. When the announcement comes, it is mercifully brief. 3 names are read aloud. Lady Keon, Lady Gia, Lady Wren. No reasons, no farewells. They are to be relocated to a monastery in the Western Province, to pursue reflection and serenity in their later years. The chief matron says, her voice flat. You watch as their chambers are stripped bare. You help carry their trunks. You bow as they pass. Even though your knees tremble, you are not allowed to speak to them. But as Lady Gia passes by, she drops a folded piece of silk. You retrieve it quietly. Later, in your chamber, you unfold it. A poem, 8 words only. To be unseen is not to be unremembered. You hide it beneath your sleeping mat. The halls feel emptier now. Lady Anne still walks them, but less often. She does not look at you anymore. You return to your ledgers, your incense bowls, your daily meals spoken aloud to women who do not answer. You begin walking the gardens alone again. Sometimes you think of Lady Gia's poem. You wonder if she is allowed to write now. If she sees open sky. One evening, you find a sparrow not carved this time, but real, trapped inside the lattice of the pavilion. It flutters hopelessly, unable to find the open space behind it. You step quietly forward and guide it out with your sleeve. It vanishes into the dusk. You return to your room and write one final line in your private journal. She waited, and even as she left, she remembered us. You place the journal behind a loose tile beneath your desk, not to be read, only to be found someday, because the lives of eunuchs, of concubines, of shadows behind the curtain, are never written in the main scrolls. But that does not mean they did not matter. They waited, and were seen. As you drift gently through these quiet stories, you realize that history is not only shaped by emperors and battles, but also by the subtle, unseen lives woven into the fabric of time. The eunuchs of Imperial China were often invisible threads holding vast tapestries together, keepers of secrets, guardians of rituals, and silent witnesses to power's delicate dance. Their stories may seem boring on the surface, yet within their measured steps and whispered duties lie the heartbeat of an empire. So, as you close your eyes tonight, let these quiet lives remind you that even the most ordinary moments hold the weight of history, waiting patiently to be discovered. sleep well, and until next time, rest within the gentle unfolding of time itself. Boring history for sleep.